actually going to scoot on over here and get a water. You're going to need that, I think. So, well, I see some new faces here. I'm glad you're here. I'm Bruce. I'm the pastor here. We are in the middle of, we're actually the second week of a series called Disciple. What a disciple does. And last week, if you were here last week was a hard lesson. It was a hard thing to preach, and it was a hard thing to hear. It was a hard thing to preach because, before I stand up here and present God's Word, God's already doing work in me. And there were some things that I had to deal with before I even presented God's Word at the end of last Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. So there was some hard stuff in there. But it was all good. It was all straight from God's Word, and the feedback that I've gotten is, people are hearing God's Word, and lives are being changed, and that's a good thing. So this week we're talking about fishing. So it's kind of interesting that Andy came up with a bunch of fishing stuff. We're gonna actually talk about fishing this week. I remember growing up, we used to go up to Ludington National Park, Ludington State Park in the fall, 2 weeks in the fall. And we went together as a family, and we went fishing. You see, my whole family got into fishing and all that. I really didn't, except for these 2 weeks. So my brothers, they'd always go to some like Huron River or some place to catch fish, and I was just like, I just don't care much for it. I get bored with it because I'm not catching anything, and then fish. Little fish, you have to clean them. You know how hard it is to clean a little fish. And I just never really got into it. But I loved going on these 2 weeks. And in the fall, if you don't know what happens up in Ludington is the salmon run on the South River. They all come in from Lake Michigan, and they run, and they spawn, they lay their eggs throughout the whole South River. Years ago, what happened was, what you could do, you didn't go fishing with a fishing lure. They had snagging, where you just try to snag one. There were so many in the river, you just try to snag them. And how they would do it is on a lottery system. You couldn't just go up there and just go snagging. They had to do it on a lottery system. And I remember waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and we'd head to the beach house at Ludington State Park. If you've ever been there, it has a gorgeous beach house on the shores of Lake Michigan. And I tell you, there are some mornings in October, it was freezing. Standing out there, and there are storms coming in off the lake, and you're the first thing on the shore that storm hits. It was cold. And, in October, there was some warmer mornings too. But we would stand in line for several hours, or a couple hours, and we would stand in line to fill out a little thing, to put it into a bucket. Our name on a form, put it in the bucket. And what the rangers did is they would actually do it on a lottery system, so they wouldn't have all these people filling the river, because snagging it's a violent way to fish. And so they did it on a lottery system, so you had to wait to see if your name was going to get called to actually fish that day. So you'd have to wake up early in the morning. And there were people all over the place. All over the country would come to Ludington. We would plan this for the whole year. We called before summer hit to reserve our camp spaces for the fall. That's how far in advance that you had to call. And so if your name gets called, you get to catch 2 hours. That's it. Just 2 hours. There's 4 sessions for 2 hours each. And so it was a great time. This is the only type of fishing my whole family did together. This is the only time that we went as a family together to fish. And now, I'm the youngest of 4 boys, so there were 6 of us. I'm talking about cousins, extended family, their friends. There was in our group, we had 50 people. And it was a blast. I loved going up there. The great thing about the whole trip was, it was in October. Usually I spent my birthday up there. And my birthday's in October. And that meant I didn't have to go to school on my birthday. It was great. It was great. So we went fishing on my birthday. But we were so committed to this whole thing. We'd go up there for 2 weeks. And we would be completely committed committed no matter what the weather was. There were some times we would fish and it would be extremely uncomfortable. I mean, October, it's touch and go in Michigan. It can be extremely cold. And we're sitting there in waders up to here in freezing cold water. And I remember when it rained, sometimes we're standing in the water, the rain would hit the water and it would splash up. So it's raining upwards and downwards, and you know, when it was raining, it's always cold. You're completely uncomfortable, you're freezing. You would get like one of these holes right here that has an open face, and then you'd have to grab a hold of the line and then cast it. In that freezing cold, that line would snap on your finger. Talk about the pain. I remember the pain. But it was extremely uncomfortable. We're committed to doing this. We're committed to go out there and catch fish. And you know, some years we would go up there and we would get half of our names called and we'd be done. There's a 5-fish limit. We'd be done in a half hour. We'd have 2 hours. We'd all be done in like a half hour. We'd all have our limits. Then there were some years that we would go up there and all of our names would be called, and we had our own little special place on the river that we'd catch 2 fish for all of us. So, you know, it just depends on when the salmon were running the river. But, you know, we were committed to going. And even in the middle of the discouragement, we were completely committed. You know, we had problems with the equipment. We had holes in our nets, or you know, I was young, and if you know anything about fishing, kids in fishing, they get tangled up really, really easy. You know, and so my dad would, you know, his name would get called, and then he'd spend all this time untangling all of us kids' lines. And, you know, my mom would get into it, and she'd get all tangled up, so he wouldn't be able to fish. So, but we were completely committed, because even in the midst of all the stuff that was going on with our equipment. And you know what? Fish, they are smelly, they are slimy, they are nasty when they're out of the water. And we were still committed to it, you know, and we were fishing for what was running the Saco River was 2 types of salmon. You had go salmon, which were only like 12, 13 pounds. That's pretty decent sized fish. Then we had the Chinook salmon, which the average was probably about 17 or 18 pounds. So that was a really big fish. My brother has the family record. He caught a 27-pound fish when he was only like 14, 15 years old. And he caught it, and snagging, what you do is you use the hook, you cast, and then you yank, and then the hook goes through the water, and you catch the fish. That's how you catch the fish. If you catch it in the tail, the strongest part of the fish, it doesn't matter whether it was 12 pounds or 20 pounds, you are in for a ride, because that fish would take off. And but we would, after we catch the fish, we'd have to clean them. We'd have to gut them, and it was nasty, and it was gross. There was flies everywhere, and we're sitting there. My dad's teaching us how to do it, and it was actually kind of fun because we caught the fish. You know, I can still remember the smell and all, everything was all gross, but it was, for a teenage boy, it was great. It was like, yeah, sweet, you know, you're tearing a fish apart. And with the larger fish, it's a little bit easier to clean. So, as I thought about that, I said, you know what? There's some people here, some of you in here, you guys love to fish. There are some fishermen in here. You love it, and it's great. And I understand the process of going fishing, and it's peaceful, it's restful. You know, I get that. Then there are others that in here that you just don't fish. You say, you know what? Fish are slimy, nasty, just smelly creatures, and you just don't like to fish.